Hey engineers, this is Mr. Hernandez, and this week we're going to be doing something a little bit different because we are wrapping up this Spaceship Earth project. So I'm going to start by kind of recapping last week's assignment. I want to go over my thoughts, which don't necessarily have to be your thoughts, on those answers for those different scenarios that we went over. And then we're going to talk about how we're transitioning out of this unit for this week. So let's go ahead and jump in. And let's start by looking at those problems that I posed to you guys last week. So the first one was a breakdown on the waste processor. It lost 1/3 of its capacity, and we had to decide how we wanted to use the remaining 2/3 in the best way possible. So I'm going to go ahead and rate these answers from worst to best and explain why I think those go into those categories. So let's start off with the worst option. So in my opinion, the worst option is where we don't produce any water so that we can keep processing the feces and the non-edible plants. I think this is the worst option for pretty obvious reasons. In order for the people, the plants, and the animals on the ship to stay alive, they need to drink water. So moving up from worst, the next option, also bad, is to not produce any fertilizer, but keep producing water and compost. And for this one, I think it's the second worst option, not because we really need fertilizer. Fertilizer is not that important. Plants can go 1 week without getting fertilized. That's fine. It's really a problem because of the waste that's associated with it. That would mean that the feces are building up, which is basically raw sewage, and that's something that's very hard to deal with. There's a chance of it causing diseases. That's a type of uncleanliness that we don't want to be dealing with. Moving up from bad, we've got not great, which is what I would associate with option 4. Here we're reducing all of the outputs by 1/3. So we get a little bit less water, a little bit less fertilizer, and a little bit less compost. And that means that we allow a little bit of dirty water, a little bit of feces, and a little bit of non-edible plants to build up. This is pretty good. We still keep producing water. We're not going to end up with too much waste at the end of the week, but it's not the best option. What I think the best option is option number 3. So option 3 is where we don't produce any compost, we just let the non-edible plants build up. And I think this is the best because, like the fertilizer, we don't need the compost right away. We can go 1 week without having any compost, and that's fine. And the waste that's associated with it is non-edible plants. So that's things like straw and hay. That's things like the potato plants that are poisonous to the animals. And a pile of plants, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. It's not the same thing as a pile of raw sewage. And that pile of plants can wait for a week. And in fact, if you pile it up in the right way, it might even compost itself without the waste processor. So I think option 3 is the best because it has the output that we don't need that much and a waste input that's actually not that bad. Let's go ahead and move forward to the next situation. This is the situation where one crewmate has started stockpiling water and hiding it away. And it's not like it's just a couple of water bottles in case they get thirsty at night. Instead, this is almost 100 gallons of water, which is like a small swimming pool. And the situation here is kind of strange because that water is still on the ship. So we have to figure out why it's a bad thing that they're doing this. Well, let's look at how the water behaves on the ship to figure that out. So the water is all connected in this system. The dirty water gets sent up to the waste processor and processed and turned into clean water that is then returned to the crew, to the greenhouse, and to the animals so that they can all stay alive. Well, what this crewmate is doing is pulling water out of the system. So that water is still on the ship. It hasn't, left the ship yet, but it's out of this cycle. And if it's out of the cycle, that means that it's not being used where it's needed, and that's why it's bad what the crew member is doing. Now, depending on how big the ship is, 100 gallons of water might not be felt immediately, but you can think about what would happen if all the water on the ship was actually in these jugs and containers instead of over here where it can actually be consumed by the people that need it. It would be bad if all of the water in the ship was just locked away. So that's what that crew member is doing. Let's take a look at the last one now, and that's the priorities. And for this one, I asked you to consider which system is the most important, because that's the one that the captain wants to put a security system on. Now, this is my personal thinking, but based on what we saw in the first question, I think the waste processor is the most important, if only because the waste processor is the only way that we get clean water out. And without clean water, we can't keep the plants alive, we can't keep the animals alive. If the plants die, that means that we have no oxygen. Some people said the greenhouse is the most important because of that reason, and I can't say I disagree with you. You can make a strong argument for every single one of these, to be honest. So as long as you put some thought into your response, I'm sure you guys are going to do great on this part as well, even if you don't agree with me. Let's go ahead and move forward. Let's look at the ship as a whole. Let's kind of summarize everything we've been doing for the past few weeks. So on the ship, we have this human crew that needs oxygen, water, food, a lack of waste in their environment in order to survive, as well as some amount of socializing, keep their mental and emotional health there as well. On this ship, it's a closed system where nothing comes in and nothing comes out, and that means that we have to do a lot of recycling waste into new supplies. In order to recycle all the waste, we have to set up a complicated, interconnected set of systems, including other living organisms that we also have to support so that this spaceship remains survivable for humans. That's not so different than the situation that we're all in right now. Here on Earth, we have the same set of needs. You may not think about it this way, but Earth is actually a closed system. Nothing comes into the Earth, nothing comes out, except for very, very small amounts of stuff on like meteors. For the most part, the Earth is basically a closed system. So all the water, all the air that we have on Earth, that's what we started with when the Earth was first formed. And on the Earth, there's these many different interconnected systems that have built up, and humans are just one part of that. So those systems weren't designed to support humans, but humans need those systems to be working so that we can continue to survive properly. And that includes other living organisms that we share this planet with. One way of looking at it is to think about all these different systems, and I think water is a good one to focus on. So we've got clean water that needs to be consumed by the crew, water the plants, and be consumed by the animals, and then it gets sent to the waste processing plant, processed, filtered, and turned into pure water and sent back to them. And that's just one small section in all of these connections that make it work. Well, if we look at the Earth, we can see very clearly the water cycle is directly represented here. So the water cycle is the process where water on land makes its way into rivers, goes to the ocean, evaporates, comes back up as clouds, and rains back down on the land. So that means that in another way, Earth is also recycling the water. And the same thing happens with just about everything else. On the spaceship, we process waste into fertilizer, while on Earth, what we have is the nitrogen cycle. On the spaceship, the humans and animals breathe out carbon dioxide, and the greenhouse broke that down and turned it into oxygen. The exact same thing happens in the carbon cycle on Earth. All of those systems are just one small chunk of the natural systems we have here on Earth, and humans are just one part of that. So let's continue on, and let's look at the differences between these two systems. So on the spaceship, it's a very small ship, and that means that every human action, something as simple as stockpiling water, like that one crew member, can have a huge impact that we feel immediately. In contrast, the Earth, primary difference here is that the Earth is much, much larger. And that means that an individual human action might not even be noticed. Unfortunately, there are billions of people on Earth. So while the actions of one person might not be noticed, the actions of humans definitely will be noticed. Even so, the Earth is so large that even with that, actions might take a while to build up and until we can actually feel the results. And that means that we need to be very forward thinking, which leads straight into our next topic, which is sustainability. So the concept of sustainability is how can we meet our current needs? So make sure that we have enough food, water, space, electricity. How can we get all of those things that we need in a way that makes it so that when you guys grow up, you can also get everything you need. And when you start having children of your own, and they grow up years later, they also can get what they need. So sustainability is about maintaining everything in a way that everybody, continuing on for years to come, can also get what they need. Now, from here, you guys are going to go to the quiz and you're going to read a little bit more about sustainability and some concepts on your own. But before we go, I want to bring this connection back to the Thanksgiving assignment. So a lot of people said that they would drink recycled water on the spaceship if they were on the spaceship, if it was the only option that they had. Well, I'm going to fill you guys in on a little secret here. You guys have always been drinking recycled water. Remember, Earth is a closed cycle. That means that the water that we have now is the same water that has been on Earth for billions of years. So way back when there were dinosaurs on Earth and there was a T-Rex drinking water from a lake, it's the same water that you guys are drinking now. And that means that because of the water cycle, because it's a closed system, every time you guys get a drink of water, you're drinking just a little bit of dinosaur urine. Just a fun fact for you guys to think about. I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. I hope you guys have enjoyed the Spaceship Earth concept. From here on out, we're going to be focusing a lot more on sustainability. So good luck on that quiz, and I'll see you guys next week.